So here we go. Welcome to Non-Duality. I'm Jerry Katz. It's June 12th, 2017. My guest is Mark Marshall. Mark lives in a small village in the French Pyrenees where he and his partner run holiday apartments out of an old renovated farmhouse. Mark is a musician and a composer, and also he's a guide providing direct pointing to the nature of reality. Welcome, Mark.
Hi.
How did you stumble into non-duality in the first place? That's always a good place to start.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question to start with. I suppose the question would be, how did I ever stumble out of it? Looking back on that, um, stumble into the word non-duality might be might be interesting,
Yeah,
because when I look back at the whole thing, nothing that I can look back on in the entire lifetime has ever been outside of this. And every experience has kind of contributed to it. And but actually, consciously of that term was about 6 years ago, when I was a bit concerned about my son, who was smoking some hallucinogenics in America, and I was interested to know what he was reading. And at that time, because we were often reading interesting stuff, and I thought, well, whatever he's reading, I'm gonna read it and find out whether it's recommending
yeah.
taking dodgy substances. So he was reading two books. He was reading a book by Alfred North Whitehead, which is a very involved philosophical tome, and he was reading something by Alan Watts. So I hastily got onto, one of the online book depositories and got a second-hand copy of each and started devouring them, and kind of got hooked on Alan Watts at that moment. So I started to become aware of that as a concept at that time, as the what people call non-duality. So that was in 2011-ish, I suppose.
That's interesting
I,
because people will
yeah.
often start with kind of more of an intellectual approach, although I don't know if you can totally
Mm,
separate the intellectual from the experiential, but there tends
mm,
to be a leaning of one towards the other. And of course,
yeah.
Watts is one of the best. So what happened after that?
Well, the thing was, alongside of that was happening something that was far from intellectual. I think um, I'd had all sorts of problems with relationships in my families and drama and anguish. I suppose around me questioning my sexuality and coming out as gay from around 2000. And it got worse and worse. I wasn't where I perceived I perceived myself as a victim and misunderstood by the family, and my mum wouldn't have myself and Fred to stay in their house with her new husband after my dad died, and so it kind of got very anguished for me. So I'd got this kind of counterpoint going along all the time, to wondering how has life come to this sort of thing, just by kind of being true to who I am and what have you. So there was a lot of anguish going on, and also I'm not referring to the son I was mentioning, but there was someone in our family who was very close to me, who had become addicted, we suspected, to heavy drugs, and whose life was in question. So there was this also playing along. So there's some really kind of some sort of heavy kind of stuff going on. So a feeling of responsibility, a feeling of fear, a feeling of wanting things to be different, um, wanting vindication somehow, understanding was going on. So there was that there. And then there was this studying of this. For a start off, it was stuff like being in the moment. And then it was both Fred and I avidly consumed everything we could find on, first of all, mindfulness, and then non-duality. Um, the one moment was, oh my God, Fred, I think I might be becoming a Hindu. I didn't realize that was this. And but in retrospect, what was more likely happening was I was like being sucked into some kind of black hole by life, or digested into something. I felt I was seeking something, but at a certain point, I sat there. In fact, the same son who recommended the books, was reading I Am That by Nisargadatta. And one summer, Fred and I, of 2012, we both gave up our work that we got, our regular work, paid work. And I said, I just want to sit here and find out what this is all about. And I sat reading that book on a mat all day long. And at a certain point, I thought, this is doomed, because whatever it is that is seeking something here is a separate self. It's an ego. How can that ever come to anything? And inside, I heard the thought or the voice or something like this that was, that's what's happening. What if you're being sucked? What if you're being caught? What if you're being fished? And that kind of changed everything for me, and it became less of a kind of a struggle and a strife, and just sort of staying with what was happening and allowing it to happen. So it unfolded like that, and then later in 2012, we came across an internet site for direct pointing guiding, and asked for a guide there, and it sort of confirmed what was being seen and what was being experienced. And a certain moment when I woke up and I kind of realized that this is all that is known. I don't even know if yesterday is real. I don't know if tomorrow is real. I don't know the view beyond what I can see outside that window is real. There was just a sense of immediacy of just this experience. And even the construct that I had thought of as me, the description of me and my story, I couldn't find that actually in my experience, only as kind of deductions, conjecture, memories, only in the mind, only in the level of thought. And that was certainly a breakthrough there, which changed everything. Lots of little kind of breakthroughs along the way. Some people seem to talk in terms of this sort of lottery win, sort of realization, or hitting the jackpot. But for me, it seems more often, and it's certainly seemed the case with me, that it's a bit more like a ship gradually turning course, turning direction, maybe 180 degrees, or a bit like a huge iceberg that is gradually dropping bits of itself into the ocean and gradually melting into the ocean. There may be sudden jolts and sudden realizations and what have you, but there's also a process, quite a traumatic process actually in many ways, which I think takes usually several years for that changing of direction to happen, and it's going on through our lives in from my perspective.
And that's interesting and important to note that it's ongoing. It's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Well,
really.
Looking back, you see, even then people heading to the east for gurus and stuff. But when I look back, at 18, I became a born-again Christian. And I was at Oxford at the time, and I thought people here will have all the answers to this stuff. But I found lots of people who were got their heads in books and reasoning things, but nothing really satisfied. And then I met this group of people in rural Derbyshire in the north of England, of Christians, and where they kind of sitting around with guitars, and they were either crying or dancing or laughing. And a guy there called Bill, who was a dye worker. These were really simple people. But when he was in the room, there was this sense of just this presence and this total acceptance that I would say was completely life-changing. So interesting, this notion of gurus and what have you, but that seemed to sow something in me that had this notion of presence and the absence of non-acceptance of anything. And yet it was in what we call a Christian setting, very far from what many people think of as being where realization happens. And maybe something there was stored up. In fact, it feels as though it may well have been for later on.
We sort of undergo these initiations. I mean, it's something deeper than just an impression or a good memory. It's something that's kind of almost has a cellular effect. And then we may not be that conscious of it, but then it emerges at certain times.
Yeah.
And its significance becomes realized. So,
How about for you, Jerry? How did you stumble upon non-duality?
Yeah. I mean, since I was a kid, I was interested in just the fact that here I am, I'm aware, and that always just
Mm.
interested me.
Ah,
And then as I got older, I just had to deal with more worldly things, going to school and stuff. But when that stuff never gave any satisfaction, I went back to looking back at the nature of awareness itself when I was around 25. So
ah.
I explored it in terms of I am, the I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a couple of years just intensively just looking at everything as I am until I didn't have to do that anymore. So everything was just I am.
Mm.
Um, then some years later, even that just sort of dissolves. So now, at one point, I encountered the word non-duality, and that word, when I heard it, it was kind of like that guy you met at the Christian church. It just
Yeah,
resonated in a way. It held a presence.
yeah,
It imparted a kind of initiation. Something in me changed, and I knew I had to pursue that word, so I did. And somehow it led to internet conversations on the topic of non-duality with the
yeah,
purpose of making non-duality friendly and approachable and accessible rather than a word or a term or a teaching that was mainly restricted to departments of religious studies or to the ashrams of powerful gurus. So my objective was to take that word and just put it out there onto people's kitchen tables and just make it ordinary, which
yeah.
to some degree that's been done. People are very familiar with the word.
Cool. Yeah.
So I always felt the word was important. That's kind of my
So maybe
story.
maybe I've got you to thank for knowing about non-duality. You and Alan Watts, maybe.
Alan
But I don't
Watts
he doesn't really use that. He hardly uses that term, though, does he?
he used it. I know in the book. I saw it once in the book. It's called The Book, right?
Yeah, yeah. The
The book
taboo,
on the
is it?
taboo of knowing who you
Yeah,
are. I think he
yeah.
uses it there once, and he probably uses it in his other books, but not
Mm,
extensively. It's just like
no.
in passing.
Yeah,
Um, other people might have used it, but in
yeah,
popular writings, rather than academic, it's always been very rare,
yeah,
almost
yeah,
unnoticeable.
yeah.
Um, so that's kind of my story. But
Thank you.
um, now you're a guide, so you do work as a guide. This is something
Well,
that
we
you
can
do.
call it that. Goodness knows what's going on there, really. I hesitate to apply that label to myself. But yeah, I've worked in that way, accompanying people. Yeah, kind of my
And
way of paying it forward, I suppose.
yeah,
That's
what
how it feels.
what do you like or not like about that?
Um, oh, thank you. Well, there's a sense. What happens if it comes up to guide? If somebody says there's a need, or comes to our forum, for example, there's a, there either is or isn't a sense of sort of compassion or reaching out to that person. That's what it's felt. And then from there on in, for me, it's really a learning process because I'm watching what feelings come up here firsthand rather than a person with a problem or something secondhand. I'm looking at what's actually coming up here. Um, and I'm just really offering questions to the other person. So it's like a voyage of exploration, but for me, not just for the other person. So I find it enormously enriching, no matter where it goes. And sometimes, one needs to let go of the expectation that it's going to lead in any particular to any particular goal. So, um,
So it sounds like the way to understand where a person's coming from is for you to feel it in yourself.
yeah, it's a bit like that Ho'oponopono prayer that the doctor in the Hawaiian clinic
Yeah.
had. Where he was he was losing staff and because his clinic was going so badly, his mental health patients, etc., was also violent in there. And he was going into his office just saying, sort of praying to, don't know to who, I love you, I'm so sorry, thank you, and just embracing kind of not the person in person, but just um, his surroundings or his projection of that person. And so there's a lot of that kind of goes on for me in guiding, that it's a relationship with something much more immediate than an apparent person who may be on the other side of the world. And it can be quite an intimate, through it, some really good friendships have emerged actually over time, which is also another thing I love about it, because obviously you question, what do you enjoy about it? Yeah. There's often something going on intellectually, and people often come wanting this sort of, especially in the internet age, and I think this is a danger really of, or a downside of online forums and the guiding forums, which I know there are a couple, and we have one, is that people can have this notion that, okay, on the way to work, I'm going to pick up a sandwich and a coffee. I'm going to grab a coffee, and then I'm going to grab awakening. I'm going to grab a quick saying from that. So I'm going to, that quote, and if I just concentrate on it, I'll just get this thing. Whereas in my experience, that really this sort of awakening or realization is not about getting this thing. It's about everything is being lost, if anything. And so there's often an emphasis on what's actually being felt in the questioning, what's actually being felt in this moment, and what resistances might be coming up. Not just the head knowledge, trying to grasp this, trying to understand this, but actually looking at what doesn't want to see this, what actually wants the status quo to continue, and the comfort zones. And where there's a real hunger, it's a bit like a fruit that's really ripe on a branch. There's real hunger to get this. There's an appetite, and that brings with it it tips the balance of willingness to look at things that I'm shit scared of, or face my ghosts and my spectres in the closet. Then we're really talking.
Yeah. How much? Just let me clarify, because when you're in a tune, or however you want to word that, with someone that you're guiding, and maybe the word guiding has already been dropped by then. You're just using that to advertise or to identify yourself. So you're in this relationship, and how much then of your sensitivity is embodied, is felt in the body itself?
Yeah, well, it is, and sometimes pictures and images come up as well. That over time I've learned to listen to those and watch those. But there is a thing going on here in the body. It is felt. It's true. But I've got to say to you, Jerry, that in guiding, there's not a person that's got it and a person that's not got it. Where if only can get this person to see more, which takes us into this situation of a school staff room where the teachers sit around bemoaning the fact that their students aren't learning better, which I find hilarious. I used to work teaching piano in a school for a while, and I had to stay out of staff rooms for that reason, because what we see is that if there's something not being got, I don't need to look any further than right here. What is wrong with this moment felt right here? Who is it that believes there's something out there that needs to get something, or something needs to be different? So it's a beautiful teacher. The whole process is a lovely leveler. There's also this sort of shadow boxing thing with myself. That's what I'm saying. That is all happening right here. There's that aspect of it. This kind of fractal thing happening. That everything is contained. The whole, not only is every piece contained in the whole, but the whole is contained in every piece. So I don't need to look further away from right here. And it's up to life what life is doing. Beyond that, if anything, how can I know the bread and butter of what happens? It might be asking questions or giving little exercises to do, and looking in this moment in the direct experience. Often it involves separating out all thought commentary and contents and interpretation and beliefs and assumptions that we live with every day normally, and saying, are those actually true? And looking at the actual experience of what is experienced, which if we keep pairing that back, we find out that's actually ultimately is unnameable. Even if I say it's my fingers rubbing against my fingers, I've applied the label of fingers and I don't actually know what's going on there. Okay, but in normal life, of course, we act as though we do know. So we're separating out the mental assumptions that we live with day by day, and going beneath that, the actual what is being experienced. So the exercises tend to be around that, and the questions tend to be around that.
Hmm. And so what can transpire or happen can be that turnaround that you experienced yourself when you
Yeah,
were, getting into Nisargadatta and all that, and things just sort of turned around for
yeah,
you. So
absolutely.
you're in some way you're able to now to impart that. Or although again, I'm sure you don't see yourself as getting up in the
No,
morning and now I got to impart this stuff. It's
it's
just all
nothing to do with
part
me.
of
No, yeah. I
right.
think if somebody gets that, they get this themselves. It's not a thing that's being imparted. If when I got this, it was ready. It was just life brought all the apparent characters and the words to me, but it was just something just dropped,
Yeah.
and that's what happens if someone's ready. They're ready. It's not nothing. I don't feel it's something that I impart. And there's nothing that I know actually. I wanted to say this at the beginning of this conversation, which I wouldn't say there's anything that. In fact, one of the studies that Fred and I sat with for a while as part of our own investigation is what do we know for certain? And the more time goes on, anything that I thought, well, I might know that for certain, none of that
Yeah.
really applies. I don't know anything for certain. So that's quite a nice leveler for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even everything I'm sharing with you now, these are not formulas that I know to be correct. These are just kind of discoveries, interim findings. For me, we're all groping, and I certainly am groping in the direction of towards something. There's not a case of certainties for me.
I
And in
think
fact,
yeah.
yeah, go on.
I mean, the dynamic of the interview is nice because it's me trying a little bit to separate things, to identify you here and there, to talk about imparting, which implies
Yeah,
separation, and then you're coming back and just making it very clear that none of that's really going on, or that labeling isn't necessary. So that's a nice dynamic.
yeah,
People can see. Worth important to point out, I think. Otherwise, it'll be an interview of one person struggling to to offer one point of view and the other correcting it, or not correcting it as much as maintaining
yeah.
their point of view, and the two never
And
really see
yes, and you raise a really
with one
important point
eye.
because what can you hear me still?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point because in my experience so far, what can happen is on seeing through illusion, what can happen after that is a sort of spiritual teenagership where everything is just absolute but there's no self here, right? So there's nobody here who needs to do that, okay? And it can become a mindy blanking out of feelings that are coming up and of other things that are happening. Where there's a whole process goes on, which for me is not just in the mind and the brain, it's also to do with the heart and the whole body thing. Kind of root and branch digestion or overhaul or something, which involves a kind of a softening, not just this hardening into a stance of this absolutist approach, which could happen from the things I'm saying to you, but there's nobody there to guide. We could come out with these sort of cold, granite-like statements, but there's a whole other thing going on about a softening and a kind of a warming, and realizing that life doesn't actually, I can't find a malevolent side in life, for example. That's quite kind of humbling and quite warming, and as part of what happened to me, I had breakthroughs in I'd been stuck over forgiving a family member who had sexually abused, messed around with me when I was a kid, repeatedly, and I was stuck on what to do. But one of the first things that was seen was that, hang on, that is nothing like what it seems to me. The whole thing seemed to soften, and the healing wasn't even, or forgiveness wasn't even an appropriate word. The thing wasn't actually what it seemed to be. Nothing was harmed, was it, really? The whole other side of that was seen. So there's a whole healing aspect. For me, there's a whole healing aspect of this, as well as just a seeing aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the two sides of the absolutist thing, and then the actual, the day-to-day applications of how life works.
Some teachers, guides, gurus, sages come from kind of a militaristic point of view, where they are telling you what to do and what's right and what's wrong.
Mm.
And for me, that's just part of the variety of teachers, guides, sages, gurus. And I mean, some of these gurus are voting for Trump. You know, I mean, they believe in that black and white dualistic way of looking at non-duality.
Yeah.
They're of the point of view that's like, you know, sit down, shut up, and listen to what I tell you to do. And that's actually valid for the people who need that approach. Have
Yeah.
you encountered that much, or what do you think of that?
I suppose what that makes me think of is in the other online forum that I was involved with, the guiding forum, because it's online and it deals with words typed. People often get into formulae of certain statements. For example, the guiding is to see that there is no real inherent self, and so people can start trotting these out and start it become like a painting by numbers formula. Whereas, and I think fine, that's all part of the play of life. But for me, any statement that is as a dogmatic assertion also has a counterpart of the opposite. So with that one, if you said there is no real inherent self, you could also equally say maybe that there is nothing but a real inherent. There's only everything is the self. You know, you could look at an opposite. So I think it can become tempting to hang on certain statements and truths, which kind of reduce the openness to actual exploration in this moment and become pegged onto certainties. That's what that brings to my mind as you say that. I can't think of any gurus that are militaristic. It doesn't really appeal to me.
I really could. But
Okay.
okay. We're talking
Yeah.
here to Mark Marshall. Mark, tell us then about you have your own group, your own Facebook group and website.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
Sure. It's called nondualityforum.com, and we started it quite recently as a place to explore awakening and awakened living. And so I couldn't find anywhere around on the internet for this. The aim is really to allow a sort of community or a meeting place for people who would want to be guided, but probably more importantly that for people where there's been a seeing and a collapse and this change of life and this awakening is happening, and they would like to share with other people and explore together and often in one's area. You know, there might be like nobody for miles, but when you go on the internet, there's a possibility of meeting people like that. And then the third aspect would be that I found that in the years that follow, new interests new curiosities can spring up that weren't there before. For example, eating patterns may change, or it might be an interest in how the world is being run, or how the off-world is being run, and or in my case, permaculture has begun to interest me. And so it's to be able to share together in those sort of topics for those who are interested. Of course, for somebody, it wouldn't apply to all of those things. Wouldn't apply to every person, but I found some of these interests can spring up. So it gives some places for those to be explored together. So it's allow a sort of a meeting place for those things, and the aim is for it not just to be online typing, that we have online video meetups together and some chats, and to try and make it as personal as possible for those who wish. Also, for some people, there's a kind of, or we're working on this, a recovery kind of program, because I think one interesting model of the whole awakening and realization phenomenon would be seeing it as a recovery from a self, or a pained self, or a poor me self, or a not good enough self. So seeing through and walking away from some of those habits that have kind of compounded this sense of this stuck self. So for some people, we're offering that sort of program to work like that. And this often works with people who have actually been in some sort of addiction, which was really a kind of an offshoot of a deeper addiction, which is this stuckness in some aspect of self not being okay. So, yeah, so various aspects of that to share and explore together.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think we've given people a good background about yourself, the nature of your teaching, and how they could go further into your teaching and how to access it through your website, non-duality, non-dualityforum.com. You're a guy who has a lot of interests. You mentioned permaculture. You're a musician. You've been a concert musician. You have a lot of things going on. People can find those things out about you by getting to know you, and I think people will want to. So, was there anything else that you wanted to say briefly before we?
Just one thing that occurs to me is that what seems to register strongly with me is that this is not about some special person teaching other people. No, I'm not a teacher. I'm not a guru. It's about like a groundswell of ordinary people that are sharing together. There's no haves and have-nots. It's not like that. People reach out to, I saw you mentioning in a Facebook post that people have to quote famous people and feel safe or whatever they feel by doing that. But we're looking actually at it happening here, not quoting other people, not looking to some famous speaker to come in, but just normal, ordinary people sharing together. It does happen to ordinary people, actually.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been talking to Mark Marshall. Mark's website is nondualityforum.com. About his work, Mark writes, "Life is one whole unbroken flow, despite appearances to the contrary, vibrant, free, ultimately indescribable. Some traditions call it the natural state, others wholeness, and still others emptiness. That is what we explore here. We question all separation, including this individual." Mark writes, "All resistance is examined until separation is seen through." And that's pretty much what you've been saying in the course of this interview. And that's from your website, which is really people want to contact you, go through nondualityforum.com and talk to, Mark, you're a great guy to talk to because you can see you're really not holding on to anything. And people can just be free within your presence being whatever we're talking about here. So if you'd like to, you're welcome. If you'd like to be guided, again, the word guide is just used. If you'd like to be in touch with Mark, go to nondualityforum.com. Thank you, Mark.
Cheers, Jerry.
You've been listening to Non-Duality. I'm Jerry Katz.